We are so excited for you to meet Kira Ballotta, who is a winemaker who makes highly rated, sustainable wines from Napa. And she is the owner of Olivia, Brion, and Cantadora Wines. She has a great story, and story is sort of the operative term because her wines also tell amazing stories about amazing women. So stay tuned for a fantastic conversation with Kira. Hello and welcome to the Wine Pair Podcast. I'm Joe, your sommelier of reasonably priced wine, and for this special episode, I am on my own again, as my wine pairing partner in crime is busy making cakes for her Baby Cakes micro bakery, which, by the way, you can learn more about if you head over to her website, lovebabycakes.com. Now, as a quick orientation to our podcast, what we usually do in each episode is learn about, taste, and review 2 to 3 wines that are reasonably priced, which means under $20 each, and should be easy for you to find. However, for this special set of episodes, we interview people who are involved in actually making wine. Because part of what we want to do with our podcast is to educate ourselves and you on different aspects of wine knowledge in a fun, entertaining, and unstuffy way, and even fun and entertaining, as Decanter Magazine has called our podcast. And that is what we're doing today. And a small plug before we get to our interview with Kira. If you like what you're hearing or are interested in hearing our other regular episodes, please subscribe to or follow our podcast so you can hear more, especially since you're only getting one half of the Wine Pair Podcast in this episode. You can also go to our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, to send us a note or subscribe to our newsletter, and you can follow us on Instagram at the Wine Pair Podcast. And if you like what you're hearing, you can even leave us a nice rating and review. We won't mind. Okay, let's get to the interview with Kira Ballotta. Hi, Kira, and welcome to the Wine Pair Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're so honored and happy to have you with us. And we're really looking forward to learning more about you and how you went from working in finance to being a winemaker and learning what cause wine is and really understand your focus on celebrating and empowering women. So without further ado, let's jump in. And what I'd like to do is start with a little bit about you, your background, your family, and then maybe how that journey led into winemaking.
Sure. So I have grown up in California most of my life. I'm 5th generation Californian. I was actually born on my birth certificate in New York City. So I also claim that town as my hometown too, which is fun. And I grew up not especially exposed to wine. My grandmother liked to cream sherry, which, and my parents, as I was growing up, enjoyed wine from the Sierra foothills, which is kind of a nice homecoming for me because I actually get to make a lot of wine from the Sierra foothills today. And so I was graduating high school and I wanted to go study economics, but I thought it was better to get a business degree for financial reasons. So I went to business school at University of Washington. And while I was there, are you a UW grad? You're waving your arms from Seattle?
Yes. I'm a UW grad. We're in Seattle. My wife is a UW grad. So That's awesome. Super happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Best interview ever off the bat.
Perfect. Yeah, I wanted to do something different and explore a new area of the country when I was going to college. And UW had a great business school. So I went up there and studied finance. And my favorite job, so to speak, at University of Washington was president of women in business. So when I was a senior, I was president of women in business. And we started a foundation while I was there to, create scholarships for other women that were going into business. I got to be an evangelist in the community and bring like the COO of the Seattle Times and a whole bunch of different, leaders in the business world into UW to come and talk to our members. And I just loved that. I loved connecting. I got to work with this really phenomenal group of diverse women at UW and to lead that organization, and then got to meet so many different individuals in the community there. And, I speak to this because that is what really inspired some of my wine brands today. So it was that formidable experience when I was at UW. And then when I graduated UW, I stayed up there for about a year and I worked at a mutual fund as an analyst. And I got to watch the stock market plummet a fun, 30+% in one day, and got laid off the next year. And decided to come back to California and got a job in San Francisco. And I've just been here ever since. So I worked in finance in San Francisco for about 6 years. And during that time, I was working in an investment bank where we got to value some winery projects. And that's how I got into wine, is I was a junior analyst valuing a couple wineries. And I just wanted to, I don't know if I wanted to just get some extra credit at work or have an excuse to go out to Napa, but I had a friend that knew a winemaker in Napa, and I thought, oh, it'd be really cool to learn what's going on behind my spreadsheets. This is just such a fun project I get to do at work. My other work was valuing mines like gold, bauxite, mineral reserves. It wasn't nearly as exciting as wine. So I came out to Napa and I met the founder of Olivia Brion, one of the brands that I run today. And we really connected. He loves history. I love history. One fun fact at UW, because this is more of a UW focused interview now, that I've never said in a podcast, was I had actually a hard time at UW deciding between finance or English, because I started working with this English professor that I would go down this like really crazy wormhole of Arthurian legends. And I ended up, I think, going into my junior year I was taking a class that was a master's level class in Old English, and then also finance classes. And you can't get a double major at UW without fulfilling all of the requirements for both, because they're two different schools. So I had to choose. And so, anyways, that's all to say I've always been passionate about history, literature, and writing. So I ended up choosing finance. I felt like that was the best paycheck I could get between the two. But I met this guy in Napa that also loved history and taught in some history classes on wine at the community college. And he just proved to be a great mentor to me, because we connected on the love of wine and the love of history and literature and all of these different esoteric topics. So I just started to come up on the weekends and help him, because as I'm more than familiar with these days, small wineries need free labor, people that are passionate about what they're, in exchange for a few bottles of wine and lunch to help with some stuff. So I would come up and help him on the weekends, and just thought it would be my fun, eccentric side hobby. And then I thought, I really, really like this. I think I'll try to hybridize it and work in finance and wine and go work at a big wine company. So I got a job at Constellation, which is one of the largest wine companies in the world. They own Robert Mondavi, amongst many other wineries. I worked business analytics. I was a national pricing team. So we were looking at trends in national pricing and advising on national pricing. So I got this really interesting bird's eye view of the wine industry in the United States. And then I realized after a while what I really loved about wine was actually doing it and making it and touching it, and it was intimidating because I knew I had so many classes that I had to take to pivot. I didn't have any chemistry as a finance degree. I didn't have any biology, microbiology. There was a lot to tackle, but I was relatively young. I was 26 or so, and I just decided to jump in. And I got a job in Napa with the Prisoner wine for my first internship or seasonal work. And then I immediately started taking classes at Napa Valley College to fulfill potential master's requirements for the University of California, Davis. So that was my transition into wine. And that was fully completed. I started that track in 2013.
Well, that's amazing. The most amazing part of it is that you were almost an English major at the UW, which I was an English major, and my wife was an English major as well at the UW. So that's amazing. But actually, one thing that's really interesting that you mentioned is that I would say that probably every winemaker that I have interviewed actually started out in something more sciencey, was either a chemistry major or a bio major, was thinking about going down that path. And you didn't. So you came at it from a different angle. Not that you didn't maybe have a scientific mind, but just that you just didn't come at it from sort of that educational background. So how did you cross the chasm from finance wine and the business of wine into the winemaking of wine? Did somebody like you said there was a person who kind of helped you along, but how did you learn the craft?
So I started at the Prisoner, I mean, I think in wine, even regardless of whatever industry or degree you're coming into wine from, you have to start at the bottom, right? Because everyone is only qualified to wash barrels to start. So that's what I did. I just, I joined a harvest team and I became a grape sampler. And then someone taught me to do the lab. So I would sample all the grapes. Working with the Prisoner at the start was cool because there were so many grape contracts. It was coming off of the original sale of Dave Finney. So we had these really amazing grape contracts from all across Northern California. So even driving from San Francisco wasn't so bad because I was already driving to all these different remote areas to sample grapes from over 100 different vineyards and then coming back to Napa to run the labs. And then I was going and I started immediately to sign up for chemistry, viticulture, biology, microbiology. And I would just take the classes in the afternoon. First, I went over to Davis, of course, and asked, okay, I'd like to get a master's here. What are my prerequisites? And they're like, well, unfortunately, you, as you've mentioned, don't have a undergraduate degree in a science and you need to fulfill those prerequisites. So I had to start from the bottom because my science at UW was like paper science. Did you ever take that class? I took
I don't think so. I don't think I took that class.
I to fulfill my science requirements, I took some really weird classes in like the forestry division. I mean, it was so haphazard and it sounded fun at the time, but what I really should have done was taken biology, I guess. And so yeah, I just had to start at the bottom. So I was in class with a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year olds, studying rudimentary biology, microbiology, chemistry, 1, 2, 3, organic chemistry. And if I couldn't take a class in Napa Valley College, I went over to Berkeley and took an evening class over there. So my first 3 years in the industry were very, very busy. I was working in the mornings and taking class in the evenings or vice versa. So after I left the Prisoner, fortunately, because of my finance degree, I was able to often extend internships in the industry because I could do analytics for those companies. So working for a big company like the Prisoner, we had so many wine lots, so many vineyard lots that I was able to take a 3-month internship and make it a 9-month internship because I could help the winemaker really optimize all their analytics. So because of that, I got to see the full process of wine, which a lot of harvest interns don't. People think that if you work harvest, you learn how to make wine, which you learn how to ferment wine, but you don't learn how to make wine, because the making of it is so crucial, the steps of the aging and the bottling and the different preparations of the wine as you get closer to bottling. So the fact that I got to see those early on because of my finance background was truly valuable for my career. And then after I left the Prisoner, I stayed under the Huneeus umbrella and worked at Quintessa. I got to work with their viticulturist. So then I flip-flopped and worked in the early mornings and took classes in the afternoons and did the analytics for the vineyard there. We were doing a lot of sap flow analysis and a lot of different stress analysis on the vineyard. And again, I got to work with that viticulturist, which was a great education in viticulture and biodynamic farming. And then I worked in the cellar and then I switched to night shift in the cellar and I took classes in the morning because I had to take more classes in the morning. So I was just full bore until for, a couple years. And then I went over to Australia and ran the lab for Molly Duker in South Australia and came back expecting to do more seasonal work in order to complete my requirements to finally apply. And I ended up getting a full-time job in wine. So I got my first job, my first and only full-time job in wine at Alpha Omega. So I got to make wines from the $50 range to the $600 range right off the bat, really. I was the production assistant, then I got promoted to enology research manager. And that was not so different from getting a master's in wine because I was doing high level tannin research and looking at wine on a very granular level to chase, like little 5%, 1% improvements in our ferments and aging and bottling processes. So it was just, a tremendous amount of education. And I was blending wine with, the top people in the industry. I was, doing mini tastings with Michel Roulon and Jean Hoffliger, and we would have the director of winemaking for Robert Mondavi there for Donna Estates, or, I got exposure to so many different figures and legends from the industry at this point. And an incredible experience, really. And then I continued to work with Olivia Brion on the side. I started making commercial wine in 2016. And then when I finally left Alpha Omega in 2019 to run Olivia Brion full time, I invested the money that I was going to put into my master's into my business, and I've been a full-time entrepreneur since 2019.
Amazing. I mean, there's so many things that we need to talk about, but I mean, it is true that you kind of got, not even kind of, you got your master's degree through experience. I mean,
Yeah.
you went into it, you were able to learn kind of in real life all the things you might have learned in a graduate program.
Well, I was running research, and I was writing research papers at work. I was going to the, viticulture and enology conferences and coming back with, research to apply to our winemaking processes. And then I got to run those studies and taste those studies. And then I got to even facilitate some fabrication of new equipment. I had one of the fun parts about making wine at a really big production facility like that has a lot of money is you have a lot of money. So now that I'm running my own wineries, I am very frugal because I don't have that kind of money or investors. But when I was at Alpha Omega, I got to really, play. And every trial I could think of, as long as we had the time to do it, I could do it. So the trials I did were still stick with me today in terms of winemaking. Like I would do a trial on, one of the ways to stabilize a white wine is using this clay-based material, and there's many different types of it on the market. And I was able to do a trial of almost every single one on our Chardonnay to see the organoleptic impact, just examples like that. So it created such a strong foundation for me as a winemaker to understand the optimized way to make different types of wine. And I still explore it today. Every vintage I'm doing trials because that's just what's been ingrained in me.
And I imagine that now that you're running your own winery, having a finance background is probably actually an advantage for you because if, as you said, you need to be more careful about how much you're spending and where you're concentrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I do, as an entrepreneur, the best thing that you can do is find a way to subsidize your business yourself, right? So as long as you can subsidize every aspect of your business, you'll probably be okay. Otherwise, if you have to hire out for things, then you're much more likely, I think, to go bankrupt. And so I can subsidize my winemaking, but also my own cost accounting, my own projections. I've had to learn marketing and sales, which has been an uphill battle, but I've done a lot of work to try to improve those things for myself too, but over the last 5 years. But really, being able to run my own profit and loss on each individual SKU and see what's working and what's not is, I think, very unusual for a winemaker and winery owner. So I feel fortunate to have that background for sure.
I'm sure it makes a huge difference. Well, you've been talking a little bit about your winemaking process. I know one of the things that Cantadora focuses on is organically farmed wine. And so why is that an emphasis? Like, why is that important to you? Do you think that why do you think that makes a difference in the quality of the wine and the product you create?
Just to back up as a overall in terms of my values, I consider wine a luxury beverage, right? And I think all luxury goods, wine inclusive, should be made in the most sustainable ways, as in we should not be polluting the air or water for future generations in production of luxury goods, all of them. So I just hold myself to that standard. With wine, I don't think that I'm not entitled. I don't have the right to pollute the air or our water resources in California in production of my product. So regardless of the taste profile and outcome, I just think that's how every business should be operating, and certainly any new businesses in this environment that we're in today. So it's more of a business viewpoint. And then in terms of the winemaking, I just think it's important to make every bottle taste good. So I don't ever want a bottle poured out because it's, not up to the quality of someone's standards. And I think the most sustainable way to produce wine is to make it all taste good. That's why my focus is on, really crafting the wine each vintage. So regardless of the climatic conditions that the grapes come in, I'm producing the best quality product each year. So I don't have a dogma around how I make wine. Obviously, as a scrappy entrepreneur, I want to produce it as inexpensively as possible. So I don't, add a bunch of stuff to it because those are expensive. People don't really talk about that. They talk about it as some sort of negative, but additives are just expensive. So if I can do something with less, it's more sustainable, but also more economical. And I run a lot of trials in order to prove that out. I don't eliminate something because I can't afford it. I'm going to use it judiciously, but I run a lot of trials to make sure that every wine I produce is the best possible version of itself. And I think when you do that, you are eliminating faults, you're eliminating, an imbalance in the wine. And because that's your focus, the site ends up showing through in the most expressive way.
One of the things I'm really noticing about our conversation is that you have this interesting balance. And I ask this question sometimes of winemakers, but you do have this really interesting balance between sort of the aesthetic of the wine and the product you're creating and also the practical side of it, which is really interesting because you said one of the reasons you do sustainable wines is because it's part of it's part of what you want to create. You think that's an important thing. And then you also talked about the balance of it, which is it's also practical because there are some benefits to it. So in terms of your winemaking, do you lean more towards the art or the science of winemaking? Because you do have a big background. I mean, in your training, you did a lot of lab and a lot of those pieces. But like when you think about it now, how do you balance that in your mind? What does that look like?
I don't know if I can separate the two because like for instance, like let me walk you through making a white blend that I made this year. So that is probably my white blend is one of my most kind of like creative wines as a winemaker because it's a wine that I've been making. I started it with the winemaker David Mahaffey of Olivia Brion initially, and then I've taken it in new directions on my own. But it was more a vision I had of the wine I wanted to make. So I had this taste profile in my head for a white wine. And I was like, I'm just going to find the vineyards in California that give me what is in my head. So I started looking for this really pretty aromatic floral, but nice bright acidity with a little roundness on the finish. So it didn't end green with pyrazines. It was just kind of my penultimate white wine that was in my head. And then I went out and starting in 2014, we looked at using Vermentino, Orange Muscat, Chardonnay, Albarino, all these different varietals we would kind of dance around and experiment with. And for a while, I was using Viognier and Gewürztraminer and Chardonnay. And this year, I used for the first time a single vineyard in the Clarksburg AVA that's organically farmed. And all of my wines, by the way, not just Cantadora, are organically farmed. And it was a blend of Cortese, the grape that's in Gavi de Gavi, and Falangina. And I tasted these wines that were made by different producers, sometimes with different vintages. And I was kind of just doing bench trials in my yard. And I was like, I think it will taste like this. This is what I have in my head. I think I need to make these tweaks to change this grape profile. And that's me bringing the science in, knowing how I need to change it in order for it to match the art that's in my head. And then I, go out, sample the grapes, get the labs, and then bring it in. And I say, I am tasting the Cortese, and I'm like, I need a little bit of different textural advantage to this wine because I feel like it's going to do this. So I'm going to put it on skins for a day just to bring in a slight bit of texture. Then I'm going to press it. I'm going to press the Falangina right away. It's going to bring this kind of acidity to the wine. And then it was so thrilling to me because this was the 2023 vintage. When I brought them together, for the first time, I think in 10 years, it matched exactly what was in my head. And so that was like the art was, this is what I think a great wine at this price point from California should taste like. This is my penultimate white that I'm making. And then using the science to bring all of those variables together is what created that ultimate expression. Yes. So that's my best way of combining it or kind of explaining how it works.
Super fascinating. What's also interesting is that you turned to Italian wine grapes that are not super abundant in the United States as well. Those are two, like I'm a big Gavi de Gavi fan, but like I didn't even know they made Cortese or they grew Cortese grapes in the United States. So really interesting too that you kind of had to really seek out specific grapes and try different things before you found what you wanted.
Yeah, 100%. So, and that's true with, I started making a Santa Cruz Mountain Pinot Noir. And because I was making a Russian River Pinot Noir, and I kept talking to people in my tastings about the site expression of Russian River, or a Pinot Noir in general. And then, of course, the Russian River's influence. But it was really difficult for me to share that without having a counterbalance of a different Pinot Noir to show, okay, this is how this site expresses. So I was trying to find something that was really a beautiful expression of Pinot Noir, but created a juxtaposition with the Russian River Valley. And so I had an idea of what Santa Cruz Mountains Pinot should taste like, and then how my interpretation of it would change that. But then I started making that in 2021, and I just released it in the spring. And it has like the dark blue fruits of mountain fruit that I would expect that I was chasing, but it also brought like a cinnamon stick. And these really, even though I didn't have any whole clusters on it, it's not from the grape stems, it's just in the grapes themselves. It has such depth of flavor, and it's so different than the Russian River. So part of it was like, I think it's going to do this. And then it did this and brought even more to the table. So I just, I got fortunate with, I always work with farmers with decades of experience. My forte is in winemaking, and I want to learn from every grower I work with. So I work with Ann Kramer of Shake Ridge Ranch, Bill Berceau down in Santa Cruz. I work with a second generation grower in Russian River Valley, and I work with a second generation grower in Clarksburg. I work with people that really can teach me, and Steve Mathiasen in Napa for his Chardonnay. So I really glean so much continually with the people I work with to educate my viticulture side.
I love it. This is a great conversation. I'm learning a ton, and it's really interesting to hear about, again, the amount of time you spend building relationships with different vintners to sort of choose the grapes you want, get the flavors you want, and these different balances and types of wine. One of the things that I want to switch gears a little bit, because one of the things that you do with Cantadora wines is you feature women on the labels and women who made an impact. So why is that something that you focus on? Why do you want to tell those stories? What's important about that?
So in, I want to say 2020 or so, I was doing my taxes, and I realized based on my projections, I really wasn't going to be able to take any of my working capital for myself. I was going to have to keep reinvesting it in the business for many years. So I wanted to find a way to compensate myself non-monetarily, in a more significant way, because I just needed more inspiration and motivation. Obviously, I love making wine, but the wine sales part can be very daunting with that extra, push. So I was thinking about like, what are my favorite unpaid jobs? And this takes us back to UW. That was running women in business. And so I was already running the Olivia Brion label, which features trailblazing women from history. And I would sell those wines at tastings to people from all walks of life. It spanned, of course, people from California, but also people from Texas and oil and gas, people from the South and pharmaceuticals. People all across the country in different industries were really connecting to these stories of historical trailblazing women. And David originally started with one story. And then when I entered Olivia Brion, I started taking Olivia Brion on new adventures and really emphasizing her story as an adventuring lady, trailblazing woman. And so I thought, well, what I'm really passionate about is talking about what women are doing right now to make the world a better place, because it's not locked in history. There's women that live, minutes from me that are making this impact that are not being featured in the New York Times or in a, New Yorker expose or something like that. So when I was in San Francisco, I was a volunteer at La Casa de las Madres, which is California's first domestic violence shelter, only second in the country. And once I started making commercial wine, I started giving back to their gala event to support them. And so when I came up with the idea of featuring women today, I reached out to them first. And I said, I'd really like to make a wine in tribute to what you're doing. I think it's really important for our community. And I'd like to feature someone in your community that you'd like to feature. So then they introduced me to Sonia Malera, who is one of their co-founders from 1976, who's currently a lecturer at San Francisco State and has done a myriad of different things for in service of women and children in the Bay Area. She met me at my house. I pulled some barrel samples and some prior wines that I made for her to taste. And she liked it and signed on. And then it kind of just took off from there. And I was reading a book called Women Who Run with Wolves, which is written by the very incredible Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And her book is about and coming back to our English degrees, or my would-be English degree, she wrote a book on interpretation of fairy tales and how they were supposed to be received by women for instructions for living. It's a really dense, interesting text that, really takes some of these more watered down stories from today and finds their really dark roots from the ancient past. And so she describes herself in the book as Cantadora, and describes that term as being this kind of storyteller with this mystical feminine bent to it. And I decided that's what I wanted to do for these women on the label. I wanted to be the storyteller, and I do bring my writing into it. So I do hours worth of interviews with them, and I post their life story on the website. So if you haven't checked that out, you can check out the different stories of the women on my current releases for Cantadora. And then I just started doing, I brought in my economic side. So I think economics is a really important way to view the world, because that's how you create systematic change is, whatever we incentivize in this world we get. So I wanted to highlight a woman that's really trying to change those incentive structures to better service women and children. So I found a paper written in 2006 by economist Marion Page and a couple other women economists who look at the poverty rates of our United States from 1959 to 2003, divided by, whether you're single or married or, man, woman, and then the age range of those individuals and also ethnicities and whatnot. And what I found in that paper was single parents, the majority of which are women, were left behind in terms of the big economic boom of our country over 60 years. So unmarried women with children were almost 40% likely to be in poverty, whereas a married couple, regardless of ethnicity, was only 7% likely to be in poverty. And as someone who was raised by a single mom, that was an astounding statistic that I'd never heard, and thought it was just a really important thing to talk about. So I reached out to Marion Page, who is a professor at UC Davis, an economist, and she also has founded the UC Davis Center for Poverty and Inequality Research, and she's featured on another of my first release, Cantadora wines. And then I also feature an artist who's giving back on my first release, because my mom is a visual artist. She was a high school art teacher, and I really feel that, the arts is how we thrive, how we heal, how we express ourselves. Certainly how I get to express myself as a winemaker through my art. So I wanted to feature someone in our arts community that was giving back. So I featured Cynthia Tom, and that was really a cold call. I just saw her work. She started a foundation called A Place of Her Own, which uses art as a healing tool for generational trauma and really focuses on women from a lot of different cultures. And I loved that use of art as a healing tool and wanted to talk about her work. And so I reached out to her, and actually she had painted one of the original walls in the La Casa shelter in the 70s. So she, once she heard that I had Sonia on board, she was, very, very engaged, very interested. So it all has kind of this goosebumpy effect. I feel like Cantadora is a project that's kind of just moving through me in some ways, because, there's just so many women. People are like, well, how do you find the women? And it's kind of like, how do you not find women? Like, I always say, like, there's not a woman I know that's not amazing in some capacity. There's not a woman I know that doesn't have an interesting story. It's just whether she is willing to share it. And also, so now I've nominated the first 4 women, and the 4th one appeared on my second release. She's a doctor, cardiologist. She's the dean of admissions for UCSF Medical School. And when I met her, she was the outgoing president for the American Heart Association. She brought to my attention and a lot of people's attention that heart disease is the #1 killer for women. It trumps all cancers combined, and I hear about breast cancer constantly, but I don't hear about the deadly effects of heart disease for women. And when she talks about it, she really brings to the forefront that stress is the main cause of heart disease in women. We beat ourselves up about eating a donut when it's really the stress of eating that donut that is giving us heart disease. And it's just a travesty that we are so unfamiliar with the causes, and also this just identifying it in our own bodies. So I just try to find these different topics that I can just combine with a wine tasting to bring this deeper experience, because when we're drinking wine, I think that there's a reason in history we had these symposiums around wine, and we had these really in-depth discussions throughout, our knowledge of history that is focused on wine, bringing people together. And I just have a way of starting that conversation with what is on my label and who is on my label.
Yeah, I can hear in the stories that you tell that you are very tuned to this. And what's interesting to me is, you talk a lot about women who were trailblazers and brave and et cetera. And in the stories you tell, I hear that in you as well. You went out and you tried something new and different. You taught yourself. You were willing to go out on a limb and make connections between people to make to build these relationships. You express this bravery and being unafraid, and it's quite inspiring. Like it's pretty remarkable. So, Kira, you're one of those women too. I can see it.
Thank you. I just feel like, you get this one awesome opportunity to live, and you should look inside yourself and see what really brings you to life, and that's what I was doing at that point in 2021, and what inspires me and makes it frankly easier for me to sell wine, right? Because whatever you put on a wine label, you talk a lot about. So if you want to talk about yourself all day, by all means, put your name on the wine label. But I love talking about women, and I love talking about these different issues and causes. And that's what I do. And so when I talk about cause wine, that's what I encourage people to do. I'm like, don't shy away from cause related wine, just pour into it what you want out of it, right? So make the best quality wine for that bottle. Don't just relegate it to bulk wine, because nobody really wants to hear your story if the wine doesn't taste good. And I always say I try to make the fanciest wine as possible every year for Cantadora, because I want those bottles, and I have them on the list at Thomas Keller restaurants, or Alexander Steakhouse in San Francisco, or different places that are going to reach the people with the economic means to create large change. So I want the people with the resources to hear these stories and to have the tales of these women illuminated for them. So I have a QR code, which I always tell the somms who buy my wines on the back label. So if someone's sitting there with a bottle of wine on their table, they can QR code and look at the whole story of this woman, and of course learn about the work that she does. But on my current release, you could read about how Nancy Ham immigrated from China as the communists were taking over, and how she was interned in Hong Kong for 2 years as a child because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then how she finally met her father in New York City, who was an American, when she was 5 years old. And there's so many elements of these women's stories that also highlight just American history. And so it's fascinating in a lot of ways, and also brings back my love of history and literature. So it makes it more fun for me. It's not totally all, altruistic. It definitely feeds my reason to be.
I really appreciate that. And I also love the storytelling element that you bring into it. I think it's probably, as a fellow almost English major alum from the UW, that feeling that for sure. You used a term that I want to make sure I understand. You used the term cause wine. How do you define that term?
I don't know if I have a concrete definition of it, other than the fact that the way that I had experienced cause wine previously was like, someone would have a side label that they would say 100% of the proceeds, or so much percent of the proceeds, would go towards X, Y, and Z. Maybe they would put a dog on it and donate it to the SPCA. And my experience with cause wine was that it was usually lower grade wine. This was the extras, so it's affordable for us to give back to charity with this bottle. For me, because I wanted these stories and these wine labels to be so kind of intimately involved with the women, I really wanted to partner with them on these bottles. So I give 10% back of sales. I always get very frustrated by the way people try to, I don't know if fool you is quite right, but just sort of confuse the consumer, so to speak, on how much is actually going back to the organization. So they'll say like a percent of profits, which drives me wild, because as a finance major, I know that you can manipulate your profits however you want, and so if you don't want to give any back, just say you don't have any profits. I just wanted to be more transparent in how I approached that aspect of my business, because of what has frustrated me as a consumer in the past.
Appreciate that. So I just have a couple more questions for you. Tell us about a few of your latest releases and what makes you excited about them.
My last release for was Olivia Brion in the spring. Olivia Brion is more of a Pinot focused brand, as we discussed, and also I bring in my light bright whites, rosés, anything that's really like kind of fun and fanciful and bright. That's what I usually associate with Olivia Brion. And so I was really excited in the spring to release my first Santa Cruz Mountains Pinot because I really just am totally enamored with that wine. And then I have a really fun chilled red. I finally committed to that name on the bottle rather than just telling people to chill the wine down. It's a Grenache Syrah blend that just has a nice softness on the finish so that it doesn't become bitter or austere when you're chilling it to a white temperature, which a lot of reds do. So it's just a really fun, bright, very delicious wine for summer. And then my Taquin, which was the first time that I used that vineyard and a single vineyard. That was part of my spring release, which has been doing very well. I'm actually dropping a bunch of cases off to some restaurants in Napa today because it's by the glass there, which is super exciting. And then I got some really great scores. My last release from Cantadora, my fall release. I got the scores in from Wine Enthusiasts and I got 92, 93s on them. The scores keep going up, which is great. It encourages me as a winemaker. It's always nice to get an A on your homework, I say. I'm really excited about the level of quality that I can bring to the Cantadora wines. Not that the Olivia Brion wines don't, they get nice scores too, but it's just really important to me that the quality of wine is associated with the stories for those women on the labels. And then in the fall, I'm going to release some new Olivia Brion wines again. I have a new wine, Morved, which is a single vineyard, a single varietal wine, which I don't actually do all that often except for my Pinot. But it really wanted to be by itself. It did not want to mix at all from the 22 vintage with the Grenache and Syrah, despite the typical Southern Rhone association with it. And so I gave it a new story. I'm basing the story of that Olivia Brion wine on the female spy network from the World War II. So I was really inspired by the book, A Woman of No Importance, which is awesome to check out if you haven't, but it's all about the women-led spy network from World War II. So I created a cool spy label for Olivia Brion for the fall. And then I'm also doing a single vineyard Gewürztraminer from really old vines in the Russian River Valley. It used to be part of my Taquin blend, but this wine actually got stolen twice by people bottling it because it smells so good.
Wow.
So it's such a fragrant, fun wine. It's from 50-year-old vines, and I've had two different people siphon some off for some personal consumption. So I felt like I should single bottle that so consumers can experience it and not my little thieves. So it's this really great dry California Gewürztraminer from these 55-year-old vines in the Russian River Valley, originally planted by the grower of the second generation. It was his dad that originally planted those vines. And so he just kind of kept them out of homage to his dad when everyone was grafting over to Pinot Noir. And it makes just a kick-ass Gewürztraminer. So that'll be the first wine and maybe just a lone wine in my fall release. And I dedicated that wine to my mom and also the original founder of Olivia Brion because they both turned 75 this year. And they're both photographers at different times, worked for Kodak. So I highlighted on that label, all of my Olivia Brion labels are associated or inspired by the stories of real trailblazing women from history. So I used the story of Imogene Cunningham, the famous UW grad, and
Yes.
and Bay Area noteworthy photographer who was, of course, great friends with Ansel Adams and many of the photographers back in the first half of the 1900s. So I actually, my Gewürztraminer label, the image that I'm using is actually on the Golden Gardens. So after I graduated UW, I lived in Ballard, near Golden Gardens, and I found that Imogene Cunningham would have shot some photography over there. So I tied that label into. I found some old photography of Golden Gardens before they brought the whole beach and stuff in. So it's like a rocky shoreline still, and that you can find on my Gewürztraminer label. So a nice little tie into UW there.
I'd love it. Well, there's so many great stories And most of us won't have an opportunity to steal your wine. So what's the best way to find your wines?
So the best way to find them is online. I ship to 46 states, so almost everybody. And that's Olivia Brion, just Olivia as it sounds, and then BRION.com. You can find me on Instagram, Olivia Brion, or Cantadora Wine, or Facebook for that matter, or email info@oliviabrion.com. And I have some, retailers in California and restaurants in California, but most of my wholesale is in California.
And I'll repeat that information, and I'll have links for folks on our show notes for all that. But I do have one last question to ask you. It's the most important question.
Okay.
And because you are a fellow UW grad, you're going to have to come back to Seattle at some point.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're in Seattle, you are invited to Sunday night dinner. Now, in our family, Sunday night dinner is a big deal. It's a big deal. I don't know if your husband does it in his family, Italian as well, but like every Sunday night, it's a big deal. So you're invited to come over for dinner. It's kind of a traditional Italian American, meal, many courses, but you're bringing the wine.
Okay.
So which of your wines would you bring for us to enjoy at dinner? And I'm being very serious.
Italian dinner. Well, what I know about Italian dinners is they go on for a long time. And so we want
hours.
We want to start slow, right? So I would start us all off with Taquin, the white blend, as an aperitif, and possibly the Gewürztraminer, because they're both lower alcohol. So we start early, like a nice little warm up. So my Taquin is actually only 11.5%, and the Gewürz is under 12 too. So those are our aperitif wines. Maybe we have some olives, some small bites with it. And then I'm assuming there's a pasta course or maybe a fish course involved.
Usually a pasta course, yes.
Pasta course. So I would probably, depending on the sauce, I would say, I would maybe do a Pinot, because it's a good catch-all. It will work with cream sauce and with red sauce. And then there's usually like a meat course. And I really love my Tempranillos. They serve the same way as a nice Cabernet would. They have a lot of structure and depth to them, and they pair really great with salt and fat. So I would probably jump into some of the Cantadora wines for the meat course, like my Richard kind of Rhone Grenache Mourvedre Syrah blend, and then my Tempranillo too, if you're okay with that.
We're more than okay with that. That sounds perfect, delightful. And I mean it, Kira. When you come up to Seattle next time, you have to let us know.
Well, I actually, just a couple weeks ago, I told my husband, one of my roommates from college just had a baby for the first time, and there's some friends that I haven't seen for a long time. So I am in my head planning a long weekend in Seattle next year. So I will for sure take you up on that.
Look us up. Would appreciate that. Well, Kira, this has been just fantastic. Learned so much. Can't wait to try your wines. We'll give more information about how to find them, but I just want to thank you for spending time with us and sharing your stories, and just very grateful.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure. And just let everyone know you can come if you're planning a trip to Napa. Come taste with me. I do winemaker-led tastings in downtown Napa. I'm always happy to answer, and there's no dumb questions for me. I love educating consumers on winemaking or wine history or whatever you're interested in learning. So look me up, find me on my website, and come taste with me if you make it down to Napa.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for listening to our interview with Kira, winemaker and owner of Olivia Brion and Cantadora Wines, and we hope you'll take the time to learn more about her wines, and all of the wonderful things that she focuses on. And just in case you were worried about memorizing all her website and email and all that stuff to get in touch with her, don't worry. You can find out all of this information on our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, in our show notes for this episode. So you just go to our website, look for this episode, click on the show notes, and you can get the information. But I'm going to give it to you right now as well. So here's the information about how to find out more about Kira and her wines. Her website is oliviabrion.com. That's Olivia, BRION.com. On Instagram, she has two handles, Olivia Brion Wines or Cantadora Wine. That's CANTADORA ORA Wine. And on Facebook, it is Olivia Brion Wines. And you can email her at info@oliviabrion.com. Again, we hope you'll subscribe to our podcast, The Wine Pair Podcast, and follow us on Instagram and visit our website at thewinepairpodcast.com, where you can reach out to us and sign up for our newsletter. And you can also reach out to me at joe@thewinepairpodcast.com if you want more information or you have other winemakers that you think we should interview. And we do look forward to hearing from you. But for now, it's time to go. And as we like to say, life is short, so stop drinking shitty wine. Bye-bye.
The happy ending at the end of our story. Always think too much, always drink too much, always drink too much.